Hello there and good afternoon. This is Al24 daily special coverage, and today's eye will be on Ukraine-Russia conflict. Ukraine is bracing for possible Russian strikes as it marks its Independence Day and the 31 years since the end of the Soviet rule. Authorities have cancelled celebrations in Kiev as officials warn that Russia is preparing to attack the capital. In this regard, Zelensky has warned that Russia offers strong response to any Independence Day attacks, saying that Russia will receive a response, a powerful response. And he even vowed to return Crimea to Ukraine, saying it would become part of the EU along with the rest of the country, saying we will return Crimea because it is our territory. In any way we decide, we will decide it in our own, without consulting any other state. It all began with Crimea, and it will end with Crimea. On the other side, the UN nuclear watchdog said it will visit the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants in Ukraine within the next few days if ongoing negotiations succeed. To analyze all this information, I'm joined live by Mr. Ruslan Bortnik, Director of Ukrainian Institute of Politics from Kiev, alongside Mr. Ivan Verdyusyuk, Editor of New Voice of Ukraine from Kiev as well. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us in this debate. A short break and we will be back. And before we delve into our discussion, let me read for you this piece of information. Gentlemen, the International Atomic Energy Agency said in a statement on Tuesday that the United Nations Nuclear Supervisory Body will visit the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine within days if talks to gain access succeed. There have been calls for demilitarizing the power plant amid fears that could bring the world down to nuclear catastrophe. It's worth noting that Russia and Ukraine have repeatedly accused each other of firing at the Zaporizhzhia facility, which pro-Moscow forces took over soon after the February 24th war.
We once again urge the parties to provide the IAEA mission with immediate, secure, and unfettered access to the site.
Mr. Ruslan, coming to you. Russia has been called by more than 42 countries to withdraw its troops from the nuclear power plant. So, how can you explain these calls, though one of the main reasons why Russia launched this military operation for the first place is to put hand on these nuclear plants? I mean, why they can't call on Ukrainian authorities to stop shelling over there and try a peaceful negotiation? Because after all, this is a nuclear facility. It's really dangerous shelling over there.
We should understand that the dialogue about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power is a big political dialogue. And taking on in the one hand the situation when the political dialogue is stopped, is blocked for this moment, this nuclear situation should be used like a big switcher for escalation conflict or de-escalation conflict. It depends of willing of the sides of the conflict. What I'm talking about? For example, if any nuclear plant catastrophe or war should happen, it should be used from Russian side to use against Ukraine tactical nuclear power, or use another extremely dangerous ways to combat, to fight with Ukraine. And also it should be used from the Ukrainian side for the like a method or like a tool for disintegration and attack for Russia and further ruin, further new way of sanction against of Russia. From the other side, it should be used for the de-escalation or even freezing the conflict. because for politicians it's very hard to talk for nowadays about the political balance, but it's much easier to talk about the preventing the humanitarian or nuclear plant catastrophe. This is like a tool for nowadays because the situation in the front line in the stalemate. There is no advance of one or another side. So it's a big political tool. It's very important for us Ukrainians that International Atomic Energy Agency sent to that station permanent mission to observe the situation, because the risk of atomic nuclear power catastrophe is extremely high for nowadays.
Perfectly understood. We will open a debate over the Atomic Agency. Coming to you, Mr. Ivan, how can you explain the continuous shelling of Zaporizhzhia nuclear plants? Why neither Russia nor Ukraine is thinking of the war safety? Europe already witnessed the catastrophic disaster of Chernobyl in 1986. Why they keep the escalation situation over there? Who can hold them responsible for their actions?
Russia is playing a very complicated political game. Let me describe you the flow of events that led to the Zaporizhzhia crisis. The first, there were calls in the Ukrainian society and within the international community that Ukraine and Russia should do a next round of diplomatic negotiations, aiming to freeze the conflict or to have some sort of agreement to stop violence in the south and in the east. But neither Ukraine nor Russia wanted to sit at the table and negotiate over the war. And then Russians did occupy the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and for them this is a very symbolic gesture. I don't think they're gonna do anything to that plant unless Ukrainian army moves to the February 23rd line. And then, if Ukrainian army advances further, trying to liberate Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk, then we should expect that Russians might do a series of explosions on the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia, and they have already done several provocations there that led to things burning and buildings burning. So it's about February 23rd line, and where the Ukraine will be liberating Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. And a week ago, Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov said again that we're not going to negotiate with Ukraine about anything. So you can't really have your diplomats meeting and talking through whether Ukrainian army will be liberating whole territory or will stop at some line that Russia wants to have. And after you don't have diplomacy running and you don't have any meetings, then the only way is intimidating. And for that you need a big object like the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to control the flow of events in Ukraine, to control the way we do politics here and the way we see the war. But the only thing that the Russians still can't understand is that Ukraine is a healthy democracy, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky can't do much outside what people want him to do. It's not Russia where the president is able just to tell people what they should be doing and produce orders and pass laws that he wants to have and that he thinks would be correct for Russia to have. In Ukraine, it's totally different. In Ukraine, democratic institutions are much stronger, and if Ukrainian constitution is given a list of territories that belong to Ukraine, recognized officially, then the Ukrainian army is obliged to fight the war until it liberates all of the territories. And Zaporizhzhia power plant, I do agree with you that we need to de-escalate on that particular place, because we do not need a nuclear catastrophe in the middle of Europe in nowadays, because it's going to affect not only Ukraine but the Black Sea region. The neighboring countries, the EU countries, all the other countries, Caucasian countries, and we sure do not want that to happen. It's not like we're in Ukraine are happy about shelling on the Zaporizhzhia plant. We don't want any combat zones there or close to that place. And the second thing is also, this power plant still produces electricity because lots of people depend on it. And we need that electricity to be produced further, because otherwise people wouldn't have light and internet at their homes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ivan. It's really good to find rational thinking like you. Coming to Mr. Ruslan, what is the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency toward the nuclear crisis? Do you think that now, beyond the UN watchdog visits, that there will be a solution?
International Atomic Energy Agency is trying to prevent of catastrophe, of course, but it's only formal side. This situation around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant starts or builds the new level of dialogue between the sides, between the Russia, between Ukraine, Russia and West, new way of political dialogue, nuclear dialogue. And it's very important, and we should remember also that International Atomic Agency is a part of United Nations, and we should remember that the United Nations had with the head of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, were in Ukraine last week, and they trying to restart the political negotiation. So it should start from the nuclear dialogue to the political dialogue, this negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. And it's very important thing for International Atomic Energy Agency to build the control about the situation around the situation in Zaporizhzhia station, because any nuclear catastrophe will lead to the situation to the unprognostical way. We are not be able to say what should happen if this catastrophe will happen in the Zaporizhzhia.
Quite understood. Mr. Ivan, Antonio Guterres, General Secretary of the UN, said that a nuclear war is an imminent if the escalation kept forward in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And he warns the leaders of the world, saying that we should de-escalate the situation. So, in your point of view, and briefly so we can move to the Independence Day, do you think there is a nuclear war that could happen?
Yes, I do think that a nuclear war can happen in Ukraine, and there are all the reasons for the Russian Federation to use the nuclear weapons, though, you know, their nukes are pretty old and not precise enough. And if Russia does a nuclear strike, then it might get a nuclear strike in response. And for that, Ukraine will have to negotiate with the international community and our Western partners who do have nuclear weapons that could be provided for Ukraine if Ukraine asks so. But of course, we do not want that happening. You know, the Russian Federation is now trying to conscript more young men to fight the war. They need at least 100,000 more people, and they're not very successful in this. I mean, the veterans don't want to fight, and not many men and women want to volunteer to fight in Ukraine. So Russia is running out of, you know, of weapons, of people, of personal soldiers, officers. And that situation, nuclear weapons remains, you know, one of their big options on how to advance the war. This would be, of course, a gravely mistake, because this will risk not only Ukraine but also all the neighboring countries. And we'll make sure we'll do anything possible, to prevent this. We don't want that to be happening, and we are happy to cooperate with the United Nations and with the International Atomic Agency to prevent all the scenarios. We're happy to have all kinds of international missions. If they want to do the monitoring here on Ukraine's territory that we control, we are happy, we are welcoming them. Maybe they can come and see what we're doing, see what we have, see how our army looks, what kind of weapons we have. I mean, we're open to this. We're ready to cooperate. So we don't want to be something, do something unpredictable. We are predictable and democratic nation, and we want to stay this way, and we want to prevent the nuclear war that Russia might start. This is a big probability. This is very dangerous.
Very good indeed. Now moving on to the second point. Ukraine celebrates August 24th, which marks both the day of Ukraine's independence from the former Soviet bloc and 6 months since the start of the Russian special military operation.
Air raid warning disrupted morning quietness in Ukraine's capital on Wednesday, as Ukrainians marked 31 years since they broke free from the Russian-dominated Soviet Union. a day that marks also 6 months exactly since the start of the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. In a speech on the occasion, surrounded with Russian destroyed tanks in Kiev center, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country will fight the Russian invasion to the end and will make no concessions or compromises.
We only care about our land. We will fight for it until the end. We held on for 6 months. It's hard, but we clenched our fists and we fight for our destiny.
The narrative of the president witnessed a remarkable change, as Zelensky affirmed that peace is no longer a choice, and the goal now is victory.
Every new day is a reason not to give up. What is the end of the war for us? We used to say peace. Now we say victory. We will not seek an agreement with the terrorists.
Ukrainian President and First Lady also honored the victims of the Maidan uprising. Kiev residents celebrating the day never expected the war to last for half a year.
I hope war will end during this year, so we can be joyful next spring and will not lose these times. I'd like it to happen. I'd like us to get more help, so this can end sooner and we start living the happy life we had before the war.
After 6 months, Russian forces have expanded control to areas of the south, including the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov's coasts, and chunks of the eastern Donbas region, in addition to Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014.
Very courageous word from Ukraine's president. Mr. Ruslan, how could Zelensky make promises to bring back Crimea, as I have mentioned in my introduction, while he is still fighting over the eastern part of the country that analysts said it is taken for good to be Russian lands? And don't you think the Russians will try to revenge over the car explosion in Moscow? I mean, don't you think they will make some new attacks on the capital, Kiev, as the president has already warned?
It means that Ukraine is not accepting any type of Russian ultimatums. We are not accepting, Ukrainian president said, we are not accepting anything, any negotiation with Russia which lead us to some kind of compromise about Ukrainian territories, sovereignty, about Ukrainian people. It's very important thing which pointing the dot of that type of political negotiation which will be starting from the beginning of the war. And also it's a high bid, high stake in this situation. We also should understand it. And also it means that Ukraine will not recognize any previous before the war balance. When the Ukraine is we are not going to attack the Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea, but this balance was broken because of Russian intervention, and Ukraine is going to return these territories. Of course, it means the continue of the war. Very hard, very bloody war. And a situation about the Dugin's daughters, Daria Dukin, it also one more casus belli, which opens the possibility, which makes more reasonable for Russia to make assassins attack to Ukrainian leadership, to Ukrainian people. War is going on, and the situation, of course, going to the new way of escalation.
Mm-hmm. Very good indeed. Coming to you, Mr. Ivan. Previously, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that we will move to a different target after taking control of the Donbas region. Now, don't you think they will use this bomb explosion as a step forward to relaunch their military operation all over Ukraine? Or the Ukrainians now are stronger than ever before, as the Ukrainian president has stated yesterday?
The Russian army needs more men on the front lines. Without more men, more volunteers, they're not going to do much. I mean, they're trying to recruit Marines so they would fight in the Donbas region. And Marines are like elite group of military forces who are prepared to do the complicated operations. And Russian Marines, they don't want to serve in the Donbass because they say, come on, we just want to serve in the naval operations. We do not want to serve in the Donbass. So with this lack of people, I do not think that Russia is such strong militarily at this point. The problem is different. The problem is that, we so much want to regain all the territories, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea by the end of the year, that if our army is not going to do this, it will make the war much longer. And we're kind of tired. Though President Volodymyr Zelensky today admitted in his speech that we can't allow to have fatigue about the war, neither ourselves nor anyone in the international community. But anyways, of course, we want the war to be over. For that, we need to liberate the territories. And now is a big opportunity when Russia lacks soldiers, lacks officers, and those who are still deployed to the combat zones from the Russian Defense Ministry, they're not fighting as aggressively and as actively as they did in the beginning of the war. So, of course, this is big, big, big opportunity for us, and we need more supplies. But also, we should also do the humanitarian things, and we should also do the demining, because so many mines and bombs and missiles are staying in Ukrainian land and Ukrainian soil, and people will be losing their legs and hands and feet long after the war will be over. I mean, people can't go to the beach on the sea in the southern Ukraine without seeing a mine, without hitting a mine, and that's a horrible situation. So, of course, I'm sure we will win this war ultimately, but at what cost? I mean, we can't allow to lose more people, especially civilians.
Mr. Ivan, I'm sorry to cut your train of thought, but what are you saying about Ukraine's president's statement saying that we will bring back the Crimea to our land? Is it a statement of a challenge, or how can you explain this statement?
This is extremely important statement since, it's only 2 weeks that we've started seriously believing that Ukraine will be taken back. And, it was big discussion whether Ukraine would be fighting for Crimea, since we know that Moscow placed almost 1 million civilians, people with Russian citizens, to live there. And the argument was, what the point to fight for the Crimea if Russians live there? I mean, they're not going to greet the Ukrainian army. But what we saw during the last 2 weeks, that Russian civilians are massively escaping Crimea using this Kerch bridge to go back to Russia. And now the Ukrainian army will be greeted by those Crimean Tatars and those Ukrainians who still live in Crimea, and that's a big opportunity for us. Now we do have 100% faith that we can do it, our army can do it, and liberating the Crimea was like an official order from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He didn't give any orders about Donbass, but Crimea was officially recognized as a target and as a territory that we will liberate.
Very good indeed. Let's move to another topic. The UN Human Rights Office expressed concern on Tuesday about plans by Russian-backed authorities to try Ukrainian prisoners of war in the port city of Mariupol, possibly within days, saying such a process could itself amount to a war crime. The Russian-backed authorities appear to be installing metal cages in the hall in Mariupol as part of plans to establish what they were calling an international tribunal. City mayor of Mariupol, Bochenko Vadim, said the occupiers, Russia, are turning the Mariupol Philharmonic Hall, the pier of the city where only festive events took place, into a place of trial for our prisoners of war and civilians. So, Mr. Ruslan, based on this statement, what Russia is trying to show to Ukraine and to the whole world by turning a festive place to a trial court?
Russia is trying to send few political signals and make a mass media show from this situation. Talking about political signals, it's signal from inside Russian audience about that we are strong and we are winning this war, and trying to compare Ukrainian soldiers with the Nazi soldiers behind the Second World War. It's like a political signal and informational game. It also is a signal of to the international community. Russia shows that Russia rejects any international criticism, international law on this situation, and Russia is going to do what she wants to do in this situation. Russia tries to show their power, confidence, and play with a game, a political game, around the Ukrainians' captured soldiers in Azovstal, to use them like a political symbol, an informational symbol, and to use them in the negotiation, in like a trade between the Russia and Ukraine, between the Russia and West. I should remind you one short thing about the international soldiers in Ukrainian army, which were captured also. And nowadays, Russia is trying to trade them to United States, to Great Britain. It's a part of dialogue, behind the scenes dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Quite understood. Mr. Ivan, what can the European Court of Human Rights do in this regard? I mean, what measures can be taken, especially that Ukraine now is celebrating its Independence Day? These presidential trials will be considered as a challenge to its government, as a response to the statements of the Ukrainian presidents.
Answering your great question, which is very interesting, I think we should go back to the February 24th, the early morning, when Vladimir Putin was making his statement that he's starting the war, or as he said, the special operation against Ukraine, our land. And then he said that the Russian army is coming to Ukraine to fight the Nazis. So right now, Russians need to show who these Nazis are, to produce an image of these Nazis. And they want to accuse the Azov battalion that they're Nazis. I mean, they're indeed a far-right group, but I wouldn't say they're Nazis. I can't remember any political statement from Azov leaders where they would be saying something like that, say Ukraine is better than Poland and Ukraine is a better nation than Germany. No, they've never said anything that could be seen as Nazi ideology. But nevertheless, we still have hope that the European Court of Justice will intervene in this situation. And of course, the Kremlin would be persuading the European Court that they are conducting a legal assessment of the Nazis in Ukraine, and they will be accusing Azov battalion and using all the propaganda machine that they have in countries around the world to show that they want to put Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis, into jail. So we need to, support not only of European Court of Justice, but we also do need support of diplomatic countries around the world, especially of those whose soldiers are fighting in the Donbass, and there are some foreigners fighting in Azov battalion, so they would intervene. And also we want to have support of the local population in Mariupol, so people would come with the Ukrainian flags to the streets if they have enough bravery and boldness, and they would stand up to and see the trial and support our guys who will be standing in this horrible trial, which is not doesn't have any legal force and will never be recognized. So we're going to be supporting the Mariupol fighters in any way we can, using diplomacy and of course using the war methods, putting more pressure on the Donbass and bringing our troops closer to Mariupol to liberate it as soon as possible.
Very good indeed, very good analysis. Speaking to the British outlet Sky News in an exclusive interview, Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that once the NATO allies need to invest more in defense spending. He also warned that Russia could step up military activity and spill over the conflict to NATO allies.
We need to spend more on defense. And I have been a politician myself for many, many years. And I know that, of course, it is always more tempting to spend on healthcare, on education, on infrastructure, instead of spending on defense. But when we live in a more dangerous world, when we see the aggressive actions of President Putin against a sovereign, peaceful nation in Europe, Ukraine, and all the threatening rhetoric against NATO allies, then we need to invest more.
So briefly talking, so can both have the chance to have a response over the NATO these statements. Mr. Ruslan, NATO keep always calling for more spending on its defense capabilities, but on the other hand, they can't guarantee the safety of its allies, such as Ukraine, though it's not a member in the alliance, but reports said that NATO could have done more to prevent Russia from invading Kiev. What are you saying about this?
To be honest, Ukraine is almost an informal member of NATO, and taking account that big amount of support from the NATO, I think Ukraine is the most important member of NATO for nowadays in the world. But talking about the more support and what NATO should do more for Ukraine, I think till the next year we should see more aircrafts, artillery, rocket system from NATO, anti-aircraft system from NATO. NATO is growing up their support for Ukraine. It's not very fast. It's not so fast as we want, but it's enough to don't lose this war for nowadays. Moreover, there are a lot of talks nowadays in NATO countries about the possibility and necessity to send to Ukraine NATO countries troops, Polish troops, Great Britain troops. There are a few countries who are ready, almost ready, to send their troops, not from all the NATO, but from their country, to send their troops for Ukraine if the situation should be worse. So there are big land for growing up this support and this help, and I think Ukraine should become a member of NATO if Ukraine will win this war in the end.
Thank you, Mr. Ruslan. Mr. Ivan, Russia said if NATO didn't intend to move forward the eastern part of Europe, which is to be close to the Russian borders, we wouldn't start this military operation in Ukraine at all. But we have launched this operation just to protect our national security. So the main reason for what is happening now in Ukraine is NATO expansion. Don't you agree with that? And to this end, what do you have as a response?
You know, the most interesting thing, that Sergei Shoigu, who is now Russia's defense minister, was the one who participated in a joint exercise in the Balkans in the late 90s, where he was supporting NATO. And then also he went through the training sessions with NATO. Up until 2003, Russian army was having these regular annual exercises with NATO armies, and Vladimir Putin was already president. So my question is, dear Russians, if you cooperated with NATO 20 years ago, why can't we do it now?
I'm sorry to cut your train of thought. I've been called to put a limit to the discussion because we do have a limited time. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us in this debate. A special thanks to our panel of guests, Mr. Ivan, Mr. Ruslan. Thank you so much for being with us and for your thorough analysis. And for now, all I can say, take care and have a blessed day.